Welcome back to BadgerBlitz TV, your rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. Once again, I'm Matt Perkins, joined as always by rivals.com national recruiting analyst and my good friend, Clint Cosgrove. Clint, best time of the week, baby.
Best time of the week with my man Perko. Ready to be awesome. Thanks for having me on.
I mean, thank you for being here as always. Let's get right into it, man. It has been a wild week. I should say 10 days about this point for the Wisconsin Badgers. New interim head coach Jim Leonhard had a very good debut on the field in a rout of Northwestern. And it seems like the buzz off the field, especially on the recruiting trail, seems to be trending in the same direction. What can you tell us is the latest that you've heard for, about, kids saying anything about, the coaching change, how they feel with Coach Leonhard, taking control of the program?
Yeah, I mean, the overall response has been positive. I've talked to some guys that are as underclassmen who did receive their first offer from Paul Christ, for instance, like Sam Piloff, if I'm saying his name correctly. He was disappointed. He said, because he'll always be forever grateful to Coach Chris for giving him his scholarship offer. But at the same time, he said, with Jimmy in the fold, I still feel very confident. And, I'm sad to see Coach Chris go, but I'm excited about the future under Coach Leonhard. So that's a good thing. When I first reached out to a number of the prospects, after the change was made, one of the guys that responded was Chris Tarrick, and he said, I really don't know. I'm going to have to talk with the coaches and figure things out. He is going to Notre Dame on a visit this weekend. So I believe they are going to try hard to flip him, which is, this is kind of a new thing because Notre Dame wasn't really in the picture. It was Wisconsin and Iowa before. So I've talked to somebody who said that he's kind of just wants to check it out and enjoy the trip. And since he has the ability to do so, he will. But Notre Dame is not a serious threat, but you never know. It's a interesting program that can have an interesting draw, and it's a special place when you walk on that field. But
especially as an offensive lineman, like they've proven that they have, Badger fans may hate to say it, they have as good an offensive line tradition in the past decade as Wisconsin does. So, there's, if you're Notre Dame, if you're an offensive lineman, especially in the Midwest, being recruited by Notre Dame, I think that especially like you have sort of, I don't say the right to take that visit, but the kid has the right to take the visit. If he's being offered the visit, he'd take the visit. And we know that under Coach Christ, there was sort of like this unwritten agreement that once you're committed, you don't take officials elsewhere. And frankly, like maybe the program needs to get with the times a little bit and realize that, yeah, committed kids are still going to take OVs because, kids want to get pampered, right? OVs are awesome. Yeah. Like they are a fantastic time. So might as well take it. And if you don't have enough faith that you're going to quote unquote hold on to the kid, maybe there is something bigger at play there in general. So it'll be interesting to see how these kind of things play out. Maybe one of the results of this is that Jimmy Leonhard is a little bit more say, okay, like we understand, like you want to go on these OVs, like, we're comfortable with that. We know we have a good, strong relationship with you moving forward. So that's one of the things that I'm definitely going to be sort of looking at, especially as these different cycles move along. So one of the other things, go for it.
And I was going to say, I'm not 100% sure if it's an official. It's not far away. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Not that it matters. He's going either way. And it'll be interesting to see, is this a change in philosophy on how we recruit? Or is this just something where Coach Leonhard, being the interim currently and not being named the head coach, that he doesn't really have the ability to put certain things in place. Also, you probably want to play it safe as well and say, you know what, we need this kid. We want to keep him in the class. Let's keep him happy and let him do his thing. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out long term. And when Coach Leonhard is named the head coach, if he is, and when he is, it'll be interesting to see if there are different ways of going about the recruiting and what the rules will be for commits and everything like that moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like that is trending in that direction at the moment. And, other news on the recruiting front, or potential recruiting front, I should say, is the Badgers, since the dismissal of Paul Chryst, or the firing of Paul Chryst and the ascension of Coach Leonhard, have had two players leave the program. Deacon Hill entered the transfer portal. Logan Brown was dismissed from the team, leaving, more open spots. So, John McNamara this morning said the Badgers right now have 79 of 85 allocated scholarships. So they still got 6 open. And you have to think that there will be more defections at the end of the season, because it's a fact of life now in college football, especially with a coaching change, especially for kids. Maybe, they had a very close relationship with Coach Chryst, that kind of thing. How much are you going to allocate, if you're in the position of Coach Chryst on the staff? How much of this open scholarships are you trying to allocate to prep talent versus hitting the portal for certain positions, especially quarterback, given the lack of depth behind Mertz, as we just talked about, especially with Hill now entering the portal?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways that you really go about it. Well, let me start out from a player's perspective. If I'm a player and I'm unhappy about the dismissal of Coach Chryst, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to leave, because from everything that I've heard, whether they approve of the move or not, the players are still in favor of Coach Leonhard. They like him. It's not like, oh my gosh, we hate this guy. Let's get out of here. He is Wisconsin through and through. And so, in my opinion, if I'm a player, I would actually wait around and go through spring ball just to see, what, maybe, and a lot of guys who do leave after these coaching changes are either, one, they were so connected to the head coach that they're like, okay, I was here for him, I'm leaving. Or two, they weren't getting a shot to play. They didn't see their future on the field as being likely. So in these situations, it is worth their time to maybe stick it out through spring ball and say, under new leadership or new coaches, whoever comes in, maybe I'll be given an opportunity or a better chance to earn my way onto the field. So I just want to start with that from the player's perspective. There's not necessarily going to be mass defections. There's always going to be some, especially in today's day and age. Now, with the additional scholarships that you have, I think you've got to be very careful. Obviously, if you start to major in the transfer portal, like we saw Michigan State do for a quick fix, you tend to have to do that for the long term, because you're filling holes every single year. We've kind of seen it with Wisconsin this year. There wasn't great roster management, and they had to bring in a whole new secondary. And they're good players, but good players don't always mean a good fit. And it takes time to gel, to understand the culture, and really play as a team. And we've seen some of those growing pains, I think. So even if you bring in a great player, it doesn't mean that they're going to be great for the program. So I think you have to be careful, but at the same time, you got to fill some immediate needs. You talk about quarterback. That's an extra spot that is open. They've struck out with 2023 quarterbacks thus far. I still imagine they will find a way to take one. But I do think that is a position where you do look at the transfer portal and get a guy that can be a great team fit, but also a difference maker. Now, with the extra scholarships, and if there's been some recruiting deficiencies. I mean, I haven't been at practice. I haven't broken down the entire roster. I don't know how they see the future of certain players. But if I'm the head coach or player personnel guy, I'm analyzing the roster. I'm saying, where are we set right now, but maybe don't have a lot of depth in terms of younger talent coming up? Instead of just taking 5 offensive linemen, because we take 5 offensive linemen, maybe we take 7, because that is a position of need. And then at another position where we feel confident with our younger talent, maybe we take 1 less kid at that position. So I think you have to do a roster analysis when you're doing this. You have to treat it like the NFL. Like I've said, in the NFL, they have film and breakdowns of every single guy that is in the league, so that if they do become available, if they go on waivers, if they get dropped to the practice squad and there's a need, they have these guys, these next list of guys who's next up. I think you need to treat it like that. If you're looking to build for the long haul, and the last year's recruiting class, yes, there's some good players in it, but as a whole, it probably doesn't fix the long-term needs. So I do think we see a mix of a couple transfer portal guys. You got to make sure that they fit the culture. They're Wisconsin type guys for immediate needs. You lose Logan Brown, obviously you need an offensive tackle who's ready to play. They do have some young guys on the roster who will be ready to play. They might not be right now, but in a year they should be. But at the same time, you might need a difference maker to come in. And if I'm an offensive lineman that's looking to transfer, Wisconsin is a very obviously attractive spot. So I think that you can find a good player, on the offensive line in the transfer portal. I mean, one thing we've seen in the SEC is there's at least one, like, LSU had a kid transfer from Harvard starting at tackle for him. You can find these guys out there because a lot of these offensive linemen come out of high school at 6'6", 240 pounds, and they just aren't sure at the Power 5 level if this guy is going to develop and grow into what we need him to be a difference maker and a physical presence on the offensive line. So there's a lot of places that you can look for that. But if I'm Jimmy and I know that I'm getting the head coaching job and I look at deficiencies in past recruiting classes, I'm trying to fill this with young guys. It used to be that you were capped at 25 players that you could sign a year. Well, there was a waiver during COVID, and I believe it is still in place, where you could sign, I believe, whatever you needed to sign in order to get you to that scholarship limit. Because at one point in time, with the 25 player cap in each signing class, schools were not able to, bring in their full allotment of scholarship players. And so, I think that gives you some leeway and some leverage in the high school recruiting game. And like I said, immediate needs, fill it in the roster portal. Long-term needs, I think you use those extra spots probably on high school players.
All right. Yeah, I completely understand that sort of arrangement, or how you would want to do that, because like you feel like at least the Badgers right now have a no like super duper glaring needs outside of backup quarterback and some depth at other positions, but they will be at least like at least middle class, if you will, at pretty much every position, depending obviously on injuries. Now, how certain guys will bounce back from injuries, especially at the tight end position. They've been really banged up there. So there might be a need to really address something like that, especially as they don't even have a tight end signed or at least verbally committed for the 2023 class yet. I would imagine that would be one place that they would really need to attack. Speaking of sort of filling in those voids, there was a really good question from one of my favorite handles in the Badgers Den, Sex and Beer. And Sex and Beer wants to know, with openings on the coaching staff, where do you see the biggest recruiting opportunity with new hires?
I think you really have to come up with what is your recruiting philosophy and what kind of budget you are going to have. And I think a lot of that comes down to, is Wisconsin going to give Jimmy the keys to the castle right now and give him the ability to build that? And that's why I worry about the administration, if they do think it's going to be Coach Leonhard, wasting any time on making that official, because that leaves a lot in the air. If you're going to invest, which they have proven that they are, they're paying a coach a lot of money to not coach, who's been very successful. So with signing day coming up, you got to have some sort of recruiting plan and some sort of roadmap for the future. What is going to be important? What are we going to major in when it comes to recruiting? Obviously, we want to create that border around the state again that's somewhat been lost. Then I think if it's me, I'm looking at Chicagoland. I'm looking at Indiana. I'm looking at St. Louis. I am looking at places that are low-hanging fruit with elite level talent that don't necessarily have players who are automatically going to a school because they're from that state. Illinois, although they're on the come up right now and it's a much more attractive option for in-state players, there's never been a border around Illinois. These kids have always been willing to go anywhere. Same thing with St. Louis. Drink has done a good job keeping kids at home, but those guys are up for grabs. So let's look at places that have elite level talent that have shown the willingness to leave their home state, even if they're offered by the in-state team. So that is all about
I've got
the roadmap. So when
outside of, you mentioned St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas City for me is the place to really go. There is a ton of talent coming out of Kansas City right now. And I think that's a place, in relative terms, it's still not super far, right? Because, Missouri is still technically the in-state program there for most of the Kansas City area. Some of the kids are on the Kansas side, but I mean, even then, I feel like there's so much talent that's coming out of that area right now. That would be a great place for the Badgers to potentially mine.
Yeah, for sure. And this is there's always been some talent in Kansas City, but there's been an influx of talent in Kansas City recently. And part of that is, unlike St. Louis, which has a lot more players overall, a lot more schools as well, and some fantastic coaches, the Kansas City schools almost remind me of like Texas style. They've got unbelievable facilities. They're big schools. They're new schools. There's good coaching. And, Kansas City has been a place where a lot of people have been moving. So it is not a short drive by any means. I was recruiting St. Louis once, and I was like, Kansas City, I had one of the teams I was scouting for asked me to go to Kansas City because it is under recruited. It is undercovered, and there are players there. So I take the drive to Kansas City and I'm hitting schools all day, and I didn't even look at the waves. I just figured, okay, if it was, this amount of time to St. Louis and that amount of time to Kansas City, can't be a long drive to Chicago. Well, it turns out it's like an 8.5-hour drive through Iowa. But the good thing about it is a very short flight. So it is very accessible. There is an influx of talent. There are big time players there, and I would definitely do that as well. So when looking to fill a need, let's fill a need. Especially, right now there's one extra spot, and it all depends on what the staff makeup is moving forward. But if you're going to fill this extra spot based off recruiting, you fill it with a guy who can go and steal top players from Chicagoland, St. Louis, Kansas City, Indianapolis, wherever it may be, and you make that a priority. But that would be my blueprint moving forward. I just don't know, what are they giving as far as leeway and resources right now for Coach Leonhard to really put his plan in place? Is he a placeholder until they decide and then they go all in? I think that's a little risky, to be honest, especially if you have your guy right in house. And so I'd imagine he's kind of waiting to see how that plays out as well before he determines what he does with this extra role in the meantime.
All right. Well, speaking with the last extra role in the meantime, I think a lot of the response we got from last week's show, which was really great, was talking about how you really wanted to just take that as a recruiting spot. I love that. Like, I think that was a stroke of genius to take that last, on-field coach and use them as basically an on-the-road recruiter. Still hasn't been filled, I should say, as we record here, 11 days after Coach Leonhard was announced as the head coach. But anyone who knows Coach Leonhard shouldn't be too surprised the fact that he's taking time to really deliberate about this last position.
Yeah. And really, the longer it goes out, the more it makes me think that it might be a recruiting type role. Somebody who can go on the road during the season, because a lot of teams aren't using these in-season days unless it's a bye week, or unless they're playing at a opposing team with recruits close by that they can just dip out of the hotel and see. It does not surprise me, and I wouldn't be alarmed if I'm Wisconsin fans. And a lot of that comes back to, does he have the keys to the castle yet? We do not know. I think, and this is just me speculating, if I'm the head coach, I say, you know what, let's get through these first 2 weeks and see what we have. What are we missing on the coaching staff? If we feel like we have enough coaches in place, enough staff in place to do what we need to do, and there are no glaring deficiencies after 2 games, then I start going to my next plan. And the good thing about that is you get through the first 2 weeks, you have a good idea of what the makeup of your team is at that point, how they're going to respond to you and how they're responding to the current staff. Then, if you do feel confident, like I said, with it, you're going into your last game before a bye week. This is when I think you make that decision. Whatever decision, whatever direction you go in, do it. Start having those conversations, start making those calls if it is somebody from the outside during heading into the Purdue week, because basically by Thursday, Wednesday night, the hay's in the barn. You're just kind of the game plan's in place, and you're just doing basically a dress rehearsal and preparing. So it allows some time for that, and then you can make that hire going into the bye week if it is from the outside, or you can say, you know what, this is a good time for me to assign somebody in-house into that role, and then really have the time during that bye week to get them coached up on the position if they haven't had previous experience. Just make sure that they're doing it your way, and they understand the role and what is going to be expected of them moving forward, whether it's recruiting, whether it's coaching a certain position. But I would not be alarmed. Obviously, it did not hurt them the first week. And as long as there is a plan in place as you're going into the bye week, when you really need to be on the road recruiting, when you really need to be finalizing your class as we approach, the upcoming signing day, that's just the way that I go about it. And I think it's an analytical approach like we expected. And he is going to find a way to make the most out of this open position.
All right. Well, I'm sure that some Badger fans would say, hey, Clint Cosgrove, recruiting expert, former D-backs coach, Jimmy doesn't have enough time to focus on the D-backs right now. Just saying. And I will leave it at that. Clint, as always, thank you so much, buddy.
Just throw me on the road.
Hey, man, not saying, just saying. You can find him at @rivals_Clint on all the social media platforms. I'm at _Perko_ on Twitter. You can check out me and Matt Bernstein on the Believe in Badger Football podcast this week with Joel Nellis. Great conversation with one of Jimmy's best friends and confidants. So we got
probably his best friend.
Yeah. So we got some inside info. So you guys are definitely going to want to check that out. Great conversation with the author of the definitive book on the walk-on tradition with our friend Jake Kokorowski, Walk On This Way. So make sure to check that out anywhere you get podcasts. Until next time, we will see you in the den.
See you in the den.